Let's do it. Hey everyone, and welcome to Understandable English. This video is part of an informal travel series that I have been doing, where I tell you about different trips that I've been on and places I've been, all in a very relaxed and understandable way. This way, you can learn about the world and also learn and practice your English at the same time. Today, I'm telling you about part 2 of my trip to Tajikistan. This was a leg or a part of a big Central Asian trip that I went on last year. So just for review, I was in the Fann Mountains and in Dushanbe in Tajikistan. But you can hear more about that in part 1. This is part 2. I'm going to tell you a bit more about Pamir and my adventures there. Just to get to Pamir is not super easy. You need specific passes or papers or documents that give you permission to go there. You do this by applying or asking in a government office. We did this and they said, well, come back tomorrow at 4 p.m. and your papers will be ready. We came back the next day. We were there a little bit early just to be sure. And it was kind of funny because they were there, the officials, but they weren't doing any work. But they said that our passes were not yet ready. At exactly 4 o'clock, they decided to stamp our papers and make them official, and then they gave it to us. Not a second or a minute early. It was quite interesting to see. But after we had our papers and permissions, our next job was to try to find a ride or a car that was going to this part of the country. You do this by going early in the morning to a specific place, and all the drivers who are planning to go there meet and they start to look for other passengers as well. When we finally found a driver, we strapped everything on top of the car and set off. They said it was going to be about 12 hours, but it ended up being about 20 hours of driving. I was surprised because I had read that this trip was very difficult. The roads were very bad and it was not a fun ride. But at the beginning, it was very good, smooth highway, so I was a bit confused on why they had said this. But after a while, I started to figure it out. Suddenly, the asphalt and smooth roads ended, and it was a bumpy, gravelly, rocky road full of holes and sharp cliffs. Sometimes I felt like we were going to fall off the side of the mountain. There were these traffic jams, and all the drivers would get out of the car and just start yelling as they tried to figure out how to fix this traffic jam. Sometimes it was a very skinny road, only for one car, and we had to find a way to pass or go around some big semi-trucks, or those long trucks that carry food and things to other places. We also had to deal with construction. They were trying to do road construction, so sometimes they would just close the road for an hour or two and only let a few cars pass. So it was always a fight to see who could pass. When we finally arrived to our hotel, it was the middle of the night, and of course everyone was sleeping. But we couldn't find the receptionist. We didn't know where to go. So we looked for the building that looked like it was the hotel and tried tapping on the window to see if we could find anyone. Only in the morning did we realize that we were tapping on the kitchen and not on the receptionist's window. We ended up spending the night or sleeping outside in our tent and in our sleeping bag, which wasn't so bad, but it was definitely an adventure. Now, our plan was to go through the Wakhan Corridor up to Murghab and then back towards Dushanbe. Typically, people do this and go into Kyrgyzstan, but because the border is closed, we couldn't keep going and we had to go back. We were going to do this hitchhiking. A lot of people I read on the internet said that this is very difficult to hitchhike because there's almost no cars, and the cars that are there are always filled. But we decided to try it anyway and see what happens. On the very first day, a driver stopped, which we were excited about. But it turned into this very strange loop. He would drive for 20 kilometers and then realized he forgot to do something and go back 10 kilometers. Before then going 20 forward again and back 10. So it was a very strange day. But he finally dropped us off at a police checkpoint, and we sat there and waited for our next car. These police were very kind. While we were waiting for another car, they gave us bread and tea and talked to us about what we were doing in our traveling, and they were interesting people to talk with. It was a fun exchange. They even told us that we should go up the mountain here instead of further, because there's a hot spring where we can enjoy the evening. So we decided to do that and went up, and it was a wonderful night. I had never been in such natural hot springs, so it was an interesting first experience for me. The next day, we went back down the mountain and met our police friends at the checkpoint again. Here, we were waiting for another car to continue down the valley. While we were waiting, they found us somehow some watermelon, some ice cream, more tea and bread. It was very kind of them. Just like I said, in Central Asia, hospitality and kindness is on another level, which means it's much higher than anything else I've ever seen. After a few hours of waiting, we found a ride and we went further. We stopped at a homestay and saw this wonderfully old fortress. It was a beautiful part of the valley, and you can really see how this river is necessary for life. Everywhere else in the mountains was brown and you couldn't grow anything. But down by the river, it was green and full of life. As we inched our way through the valley, or slowly moved through the valley, we stopped at different villages, saw different hot springs, explored spooky, scary bridges, and so on. But the thing I remember most was at this place called Yamchun. There was a famous hot spring up the mountain, and we were going to go visit. But as we were coming into the village, a kind local man invited us to tea. Tea turned into dinner, and dinner turned into him asking us to stay the night there. The whole time it was wonderful. He treated us as guests, and he didn't want any money, didn't want any food. He simply wanted to have guests feel home in his small village. He showed us about how they live in that village, and the most interesting thing to me was the Pamir house. It's this wooden house built with this big hole in the ceiling. In the summertime, it lets the light in. In the wintertime, it's for the furnace. Most of the house is flat, with a step on each side. And you can use these steps to sit or to eat, or you even put a sort of fabric down to sleep on these things. It's a very interesting way to live. As I said, hitchhiking can be difficult in this place. Sometimes cars would stop and there would be 15 people in a car that was meant for 6, but they would still somehow find room for us. This was funny for me. One time we were driving with probably 15 or 16 people in the car, and we saw a policeman, and I thought, well, if we're in the United States, he would definitely stop us and fine us because we have too many people. But we just waved at the policeman, he waved back and continued on. He did not care that we were breaking the rules. It seemed like it was normal. As we continued on, we explored different valleys, different mountains. We saw some ancient rock drawings, which were wonderful to see. We continued onwards until we connected to the main Pamir Highway. From there, we linked up, or we found another set of tourists. They were from Germany, and we went together. We waited for hours and hours to finally catch another car, and then we went towards Murghab, the final point, or the furthest point in our trip. Along parts of this highway, you can see why nobody lives there. There is no water, no plants. It's impossible to live. And the road is so bumpy that as we were listening to music, the bumps would cause the music to skip and repeat. So you heard the same song over and over and over again. It was almost like torture. Now, this place they call the roof of the world because it's very, very high, but it doesn't really feel like that. You look and see some flat places and might think that you are like at a normal place, but you're actually 4,000 meters up in the air. And these other mountains that look like small hills around you are actually 5,000 or 6,000 meters tall. It's crazy to see. You feel like you're low, but actually you're on top of the world. Along the way, we made some stops. We saw this cool emerald pool with super clear and transparent water. They said you can drink out of it without filtering or cleaning it, but I've had some bad experiences with that, so I did not want to test it. But the locals drink it just fine. When we finally got to Murghab, it was the end of the road for us before we had to turn around. The city wasn't much. You really can't grow anything or do anything there, so the people who live there need to buy all of their things. But from there, a typical tourist would continue to Kyrgyzstan, but because the borders were closed, we had to go back towards Dushanbe and then up a different direction in order to get to Kyrgyzstan. And as we were hitchhiking back to Dushanbe, it was funny that the same young people who grabbed us on the way there grabbed us on the way back. On the way back, we stopped at a hot spring that was super hot. So hot that it was hard to even get in. But the people there gave us some tea and some food, and it was a wonderful experience to have. And after 2 days of riding in a car along bumpy and crazy roads, we made it back to Dushanbe. And just like that, my adventure in Tajikistan finished. Next up, I went to Kyrgyzstan, but that will be a different video. If you learned something new, feel free to press like or subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Understandable English. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Toodles!